I just kind of noticed that Scott, as he left Classy, he started posting all of these just insane helpful feedback for us as leaders and myself as a growing business leader. And I just wanted to pick his brain. I was like, hey, what are you up to these days? What are you doing? And essentially, I'll kind of try and pack it into a little package, but essentially, what he's doing is he's creating really a traction kind of model book for purpose-driven leaders. Is anyone familiar with traction or on traction EOS? Yeah. Well, he's really doing that for really businesses that are purpose-driven, so you can scale your business without losing your soul. So he has an amazing community with Jail over there who started this called Highland. I'm a member. It's helped take our company to new levels. We grew over 25% last year just by switching and learning about a couple different things. And it's just directly correlated with Scott's work. And I just continue to keep picking his brain, learning his brain. And so he's going to have a quick session here today. He'll talk all about the North Star operating system. But at the end, I really want you to think of some questions for him to really just pick his brain while he's here. So with that being said, it's my great honor and gift to welcome Mr. Scot Chisholm.
Thanks, buddy. Back leg. All right, let me get situated here. Oh, how you guys doing?
Good.
You got your coffee? Not a food coma? All right. So the name of my talk today, as you can see right there on the screen, is How to Scale Without Losing Your Soul. This is probably not, is that safe? We'll roll with it. Okay, so I'm going to bring you guys on a little journey today. You ready? First, I'm going to appeal to your analytical side of your brain. If you have a phone or a computer or I don't know what the electronics rule is in this conference, but you can pull this up. We have a whole Google slide deck that is the first framework of 3 of the North Star OS. I will be getting to this at the end of the presentation. I didn't want this presentation just to be about every little detail about the system. You guys can digest that yourself, but I really wanted this to be about the why behind the system, why we decided to build it at Classy, why I'm now teaching it to hundreds of other founders and CEOs. And so that's really what the talk is primarily about. And then I'll roll right into this at the end. And then, like Kevin said, if anyone has any questions, I'll make myself available really throughout the day to answer anything you guys have. So cool? All right, so my name is Scott. I'm the founder of software company Classy, now part of GoFundMe. Who knows Classy? All right, half the room. Who knows GoFundMe? Yeah. Always get a better response on that one. So for those of you who do not know Classy, Classy is a SaaS company for nonprofit organizations. We work with over 10,000 nonprofits, big and small now. I ran the company for 15 years as founder and CEO, scaled it to about 300 people on the team-ish or so. We were doing billions on the platform, donations per year, and raised about $200 million in venture from the 3 primary investors were Norwest Venture Partners, Salesforce, and Mithril. We sold to GoFundMe in 2022 to create the largest giving platform in the world. And that has been going pretty well, I must say. I'm about 10% involved in the company. I took on more of an advisory role after the acquisition. But I'm happy to announce that I think we crossed 6 months ago. Collectively, both companies have raised now over $30 billion for individual and nonprofit causes, Classy being a huge, huge portion of that. So we're kind of behind the scenes. We're not as out in front as GoFundMe, but you don't know us from a branding perspective, hence the hands. But the volume on the platform now is quite extraordinary. So I ended up moving to Whitefish, Montana. Anyone ever been there? Oh, wow.
Jeez.
More people have been to Whitefish than know Classy. What's the deal with that? God, we gotta figure this out. So I'm up there with my family. I started a couple local businesses, Haskell Creek and Safe Farmland, a nonprofit, and you can check that out if you're interested. But my day-to-day, my primary time and where my focus is on a coaching program and community that Kevin mentioned called Highland. And the backbone of the Highland curriculum is something that I call the North Star operating system. That's that link that I showed, and we're going to get to that in a sec. So this is me. Every Wednesday, I do a masterclass to about 75 CEOs now and growing. And I go through a wide range of operational management and leadership topics with, again, the North Star being the crux of what we talk about. And one of the things that most founders that enter Highland really struggle with, and maybe you guys have experienced this yourself, is this transition, going from builder to scaler or founder to proper CEO. So when you're in the building side, you're essentially doing whatever it takes to get to product market fit, to get early traction, and you're in basically all the details all the time. And when you're acting as a scaler, you've somehow figured out how to create an environment of high performance that consistently spits out results every month, every quarter, and every year. And I call this the second chasm. You've probably heard of the first chasm from the book, Crossing the Chasm, which is roughly described as finding product market fit and mass adoption. I call this the second chasm because most founders that I talk to and enter Highland really struggle with this, or they just never get past it, period. And most commonly, it's not as binary as I'm just a builder, I'm just a scaler. Most commonly, I find, this is going to look weird, but I can find people with one leg on one side and one leg on the other side, and they don't fully transition their mindset into a scaler. How many people maybe think that they're doing that right now? All right, yeah, we've all been there. There's no shame in this at all. All right, so why am I talking about Classy? Well, the North Star OS was born in Classy through very, very strenuous circumstances. I like to say it was born out of the ashes of one of our most challenging moments as we were scaling the company. So I can't talk about the North Star OS without telling the story of Classy and then getting there eventually. So this is me and my co-founder, Pat, and on the left is Marshall. And I don't know if you guys know or the people that had heard of Classy know the founding story, but it started as a pub crawl of all things to raise money for the American Cancer Society because my mom had cancer growing up. And it was just a bunch of friends living in a house, and we decided to do this fundraiser, and we ended up raising $1,000 for the ACS. And that Monday morning, I called the ACS up, and the woman on the other line said, what are you calling for? And I said, well, it's amazing. We raised $1,000 for you. We plastered the town with your logo. We're so excited. And she was like, wait, what'd you do? You know, you actually can't do an unsanctioned event and use our logo around town. She actually got mad at me. And I said, well, okay, fine, we'll donate it to someone else. Do you want the money? She said, well, I want the money, but you have to come to this sanctioned event called the Relay for Life and donate it that way. And for anyone that knows what the Relay for Life is, we were 23 at the time, so put yourself in our shoes, but the Relay for Life is basically an event with 40 and 50-year-old women walking around a track for 24 hours. No offense, but that wasn't exactly what we wanted to do at 23 years old. So it was a huge disconnect between us as first-time donors and someone that was trying to give and where they were pushing us to. But we actually went to the event. We did a lap around the track, handed them the check, and got the hell out of there. But we were left with this question, you know, this taste in our mouth. Like, why did giving have to be so hard? Like, why were they throwing us through all these hoops when we were really first-time givers? Like, this was the first time we were showing any initiative into the cause. And so that led us to do more events, more fundraising events, really in San Diego, right here, under this sort of mission of getting young people involved in philanthropy, period. Had nothing to do with technology. So for like 4 years, all we did was host events, from more pub crawls, of course, to sporting events, big ones, big concerts, things like that. That was, I don't think that was in Mission Bay, but we did a huge event in Mission Bay, and then they stopped doing events there. That was our fault. Sorry about that. But we did massive events. We raised tons of money, and it was awesome. And eventually, we built the alpha version of Classy for our own fundraising events. The events got so big, we built it for our need. And then the nonprofits we were benefiting said, whoa, what you built's actually really cool. And it basically allowed you to get people to donate that were coming to the event and create a peer-to-peer fundraising page and start fundraising online. And this was like in 2010, 2011. So that was like a big deal. And it was socially integrated. Can you believe that, guys? Like, wow. And so it sounds so silly looking back, but this was a huge deal for nonprofits who are struggling to connect with the next generation. So we would eventually become the largest B2B fundraising platform in the world, from what I know, all from a silly Anchorman pub crawl. That's where Stay Classy came from, in Pacific Beach. And I love this tagline, the best giving experience to build with Classy. I think this perfectly encapsulates what we were trying to build with the company, which was to deliver great experiences to our nonprofits who then delivered it to their supporters, just like we wanted to see when we were trying to engage the ACS. We also had a huge impact arm to the company. I'm not sure anyone maybe has heard of the Classy Awards. This is, I see a little hand, half a hand. Did you go? Amazing. So this was basically the Oscars of philanthropy. That's a real picture. So this was in a theater. Thousands of people would gather, and we would hand out these awards very legitimately. We had a whole judging panel, a huge analytical framework behind the results, all this stuff. And that was really our impact arm that we said. And so the Classy Awards and all of our work with the nonprofits sort of brought us down the B Corp path. And I don't think we still hold the crown, but at one point we were the largest technology B Corp in the world. And I think we were dethroned by Lemonade, which is an insurance company, not a tech company, but that's a different story for another day. So will any B Corp folks here? Or anyone work at B Corp? I got a bone to pick. Nope, all right, cool. All right, so this was us around 2018 or so. Looking good, right? I had a weave. You see that? I kind of lost a little bit of my hair since then, but that looks pretty sweet. If you were an outsider looking at Classy, you would think that we had it all figured out. We were like crushing life. We were the darling of San Diego. We had just raised $30 million. We were basically the shit. But here's what was really going on. So San Diego Union Tribune writes this article about me. And behind the scenes, the wheels were really falling off the company. I was forcing a smile. That was a pretty good fake smile, actually. But I was forcing a smile in this article. I was having cold sweats, every single day at night. I was going into the bathroom having anxiety attacks. And all because I was getting pushed out of the company as the CEO and the founder. And I really had absolutely no idea what to do about it. And the reason was we were getting massive, massive pressure from that same investor who invested the $30 million that I talked about earlier. They underwrote the investment to a certain growth number. We were not hitting said growth number. And so pressure was applied. And if anyone's ever been in this particular situation and you're under attack by an investor, it's not a pleasant place to be. Let me tell you that. They essentially cut off all funding to the company. So we couldn't raise money, we couldn't take on debt, and we had 6 months left of runway. So they were bleeding us dry. They cut off the option pool and restricted raises to our employees. So we had no ability to really hire or promote. And they did a shock and awe campaign against me, bullying, harassment. I could go on for hours on this one, to get me to self-select out, to get me to quit, to get me to doubt myself, because that was much easier than rallying the board to fire me. And this is what we basically all went through. We were almost dead, like Rocky here. So there were basically two options in front of me. I could agree to their new terms, in which that would make them the controlling shareholder and take over the company, and I would leave as CEO. And I'd be able to retain my equity, so it's kind of the safe path, if you will. Or I could basically risk everything and I could fight them. You probably think I'm going to say I picked number 2, but I didn't. I picked number 1. This is why co-founders are important. My co-founder, Pat, you saw in that picture, brought me out for a beer. And within an hour, he convinced me, basically, get off my ass and to fight. So we went back into the building, we created a plan, and we charted a course to raise $30 million and buy out this investor. And that was the hardest money I've ever raised. Imagine, new investors were off the table. Imagine going to a new investor and be like, oh, by the way, we have this huge dispute with this investor who just invested. Why don't you invest in us? They're like, what is fucking wrong with you? So that was off. Then our current investors, Salesforce, this was a big deal. They're like, I thought you guys are like the darling. What are you talking about? You're in this dispute. What are you talking about? Your Series C investor wants you out of the company. So just imagine those conversations, but we were able to do it. We raised all $30 million, totally behind the scenes. Salesforce doubled down. Norwest wasn't an investor at that point. Mithril are angel investors because they believed in the team and they believed in the mission. And so there was like literally, 24 hours to close this deal, paperwork exchanged, everyone's covering their ass, all that good stuff with lawyers. And we get an email, and the email says the deal's off. You've missed the deadline for your paperwork and signature by 30 minutes. We thought they were kidding. They were not kidding. Silence. And I remember calling my wife, Carrie, and I'm literally crying. And I say, it's over. Like, it's done. Like, game over. It was checkmate. And I remember that night, it was probably 8 or 9 p.m. I was like, what the fuck do I do? I pulled this Hail Mary. I called the founder of the firm. He lives in Baltimore, not even here. And he didn't pick up, but I left this pleading voicemail, like, just let the company live. He never responded. He never texted back, nothing. And I went to bed, and I was thinking, if I could just get out of this, I'm just going to completely redo how I run this company. No more compromises, no more concessions. I'm going to run it the way that I know I can, that my gut says. And I went to bed for like an hour, and I woke up, and in the inbox was an email that says the deal's back on. If you pay $50,000 more in legal expenses, we said, fuck you very much, and we paid that and got them out of the company. So Classy was basically reborn.
Woo!
Yeah. See the light. We were basically reborn. And as anyone that's had a near-death experience and then you wake up, you see things with tremendous clarity and you're like, wait, how the fuck did that happen? Sorry, I'm swearing so much. I'm from Boston. How did that happen? How did we even get here? Like, we got to protect against those things moving forward. And that was actually the impetus of the North Star operating system. We had to basically analyze what went wrong and build a system to protect against those things forever, whether I was part of the company or not. And I can summarize our mistakes in basically 2 big buckets. One was our foundation was too weak. And it was just too easy to push us over and fall at any sign of adversity. So like the things that we held most dear, our mission, our values, our vision, those types of things that you would, in some circles, would consider mushy, maybe not in this room, but that's not really that important. Let's just look at the analytics and the finance and all that stuff. Well, guess what? The stuff that protects the company in its worst times, we just let go. And I knew that we could never let that happen again. I knew that you couldn't let just one person, even though they're influential, just push the whole team over, push everything you cared about just because they applied some pressure. So we needed a way stronger foundation. And the second was we lost the connectivity across the team. And that means like the fibers that connect everyone, the rhythm across the team. It was like the signal that connected us all got really, really low. And no one had a direction. And there was like a bunch of conflict all the time. And part of that was because we were forced to hire a totally new executive team. And I kind of just like threw them in there. I'm like distracted with this war. And so they start taking the company in all these different directions, fighting with each other and all this stuff. It's like fiefdoms and systems and processes under this leader that are different than this leader. I basically completely lost control. Oh, wow. I didn't even know I had that slide in there. That's cool. Hey, this is what the talk's about, guys. Did anyone track the founder mode stuff that happened like 6 months ago? Raise your hand if you did. Yeah, okay. Not too many. So I'll tell you about it because it's relevant. So if you hadn't heard about it, it started with Brian Chesky giving a talk at Y Combinator in front of like a couple hundred founders. And he was going on and on and on about how he had been listening to this conventional wisdom, what all the business gurus and consultants tell you. And that's basically to hire great executives and get out of their way. Like like there's all a moment in time that every founder gets to where they know better than you, and you should basically step back and let them run the company. But the more he got out of the way, the more dysfunctional the company became, and he tried to get back into the details, but then they'd call him a micromanager, and it was basically this downward spiral, and he lost control. Until one day he snapped. I don't know if he fired the executives or not. I don't know what he did, but basically he had a total reset moment. And he said, I'm going to basically change the way I lead. My idol, Steve Jobs, I'm going to study Steve Jobs. And I'm going to figure out how he was able to balance the vision and the details. And he created basically a management system that Paul Graham later called founder mode. It's not much of a system, it's more of a philosophy. And so the internet went bananas, they went crazy. Some people loved it, some people hated it, some people took it way too far. They said all executives should be fired. There should be no more managers, just a flat org. Everyone just reports to the founder. The founder should just be, involved in all details. And, that's not what Chesky meant by founder mode. And I knew this because I literally had just gone through it. And I was in awe at how similar the stories really were. So founder mode, I just want to explain that because it really does tie into the North Star. It's not about propping the founder up like some messiah. It's about defining what makes the founding team and therefore the company unique and special in the first place, and building systems to reinforce those qualities and even amplify them as you grow. That's what founder mode is. And it doesn't stop and end with the founder. It needs to be ingrained into the DNA of the company, so when the founder leaves, it just keeps going. The torch is carried. And that's what he was getting at. So it's good. You guys are starting, most people hadn't really tracked this, so you're starting from a fresh slate anyways. But I wanted to make sure that we hit that. So to develop the North Star OS, I studied two very different founders than Steve Jobs. I studied Andy Grove, the legendary CEO of Intel, who I would consider like a master of systems. And I was an industrial engineer myself, so I always kind of nerded out and gravitated towards him. And then Yvon Chouinard, the also legendary founder and CEO of Patagonia, who I would consider a master of culture. I don't know if he would say that, but I think he is. And I'll explain why in a sec. But these were the two people that I really admire. So I went back to these books and I immersed myself in it. I was like, okay, if I'm building a system, I need to balance these two worlds, the best of world-class operations and the best of culture, or in this case, I call it soul. So one of the concepts that drove a lot of my thinking was this idea of managerial leverage that Andy Grove talks about in his book, High Output Management. So leverage is simply the difference between what you put into something and what you get out. So when you're talking about managing or leading a team, as a leader, you're trying to figure out, where do I focus my time so I get the biggest bang for my buck? Like, what are those things? And by bang for the buck, I mean it affects the most people in the most positive way. And it helps shape their behavior, helps them make better decisions without you in the room. That's what leverage means for me. And not just for I'm going to tell someone to do something and they're going to go do it like in the next week. I'm talking about months, quarters, years long. Oops. Oh, we'll stay on that. Okay, cool. So when I really sat down and started to think about this more, I came to the conclusion that the highest leverage activity that a leader could do was basically build a self-reliant or self-managing team. And I don't mean like hand the baton to an executive and just see what happens. I mean a team that operates under the same mental framework as the founding team. They cherish the same principles. They make similar or even better decisions than the founding team could ever do. And what's crazy is, guess who did this better than anyone? Yvon Chouinard. And he's not actually known as a great operator. You don't think, oh, wow, he's a really great operator, Yvon Chouinard. But he built a self-managing team. If you think about it, Patagonia has some of the strongest culture and belief system in the world. And he hasn't been the CEO for decades. So how did that happen? How did he ingrain such a system and a set of principles and foundation into the company that he can basically play this like very relatively passive chairman role? I'm not even sure that's his role now, he's probably retired. And the company continues to operate under that North Star. Like, how did he do that? In his book, if you've anyone read the book, Let My People Start Thinking, he talks about philosophies, which are basically values-based operating instructions across functions. So it's how Patagonia views the world in finance, in people management, in sustainability. So this helps every new person, old person, future person understand, how do I operate? Like, what's the Patagonia way? Like, how do I operate within the Patagonia framework? And so, in my opinion, he's done that better than anyone. There we go. So if self-managing teams, let me take a sip of this coffee here. So if self-managing teams was the ultimate goal, meaning the company could live on without the founder, do just as well or do better like Patagonia, then the unlock, I realized, was having your organization get insanely good at delegation at every level of the company. Every project, so when you delegate a project, every function, so functional level delegation is putting a leader over a function like marketing or operations or sales, that is delegation. Even when you have a succession plan and you hand the company off to a new CEO, that's delegation. So how can you become amazing at delegation, have all your people become amazing at delegation, and all the instruction and the coaching that comes along with that? That's the muscle that builds self-managing teams. And I think back on those executives at Classy, I kind of at the time pointed the finger at them, be like, oh, you're really, this is a mess, and I wanted to blame them because they just couldn't get their shit together while I was dealing with this crazy investor and blah, blah, blah. But they didn't really fail. Well, they kind of failed, but they failed because of me. I didn't give them the instructions. I didn't let them know what the Classy way was. So because I was so removed from them and the fibers weren't there and the cohesion wasn't there, they were just doing the best they could. They were doing what they thought was right. But they didn't know how, just like in Patagonia, they didn't know how to operate in the Classy way under the framework. There was no operating system that told them our belief system or the rules of engagement or what the company priorities were. And that's a pretty big deal. So at its heart, I failed. It was a failure in delegation is what it really was. And that was on me. So as you can see on the slide, there's basically 3 building blocks or tools rather, to get your delegation correct. And this is really the foundation of the North Star OS. That's why I put it up here. Guardrails, checkpoints, and incentives. So guardrails are basically like the boundaries of the product. Has anyone ever gone bowling with a 5-year-old? And they put the bumper lanes on in the alley? That's so their ball doesn't go in the gutter. That's kind of what guardrails are for your company. You're basically putting the bumper lanes up for folks so they can operate within the lanes. And they say, hey, we don't believe in this. We don't go that way. Now that doesn't mean don't be creative or anything. I'm not saying this is like a bunch of robots you're building here. But it says, hey, this is our value system. This is what we do and we don't do. It helps them act, helps them make decisions. And this is where we're going as a company. Checkpoints are the review system along the way to ensure progress and to drive accountability, especially peer-to-peer accountability. And incentives, which are either financial, career, or purpose-based, align the individual incentives with the company's motivations, essentially, or its priorities. So all 3 are very, very important at every level. You need these even in a task and project-based delegation, some form of this. And you definitely need them in functional level delegation at the executive level. And you absolutely need them if you're going to just say, hey, you're now the CEO of Classy. And they're like, well, okay, like, well, how do I operate this thing? Of course you're going to have these things. It's almost obvious. It's silly to think about, putting a succession plan in place without some of this for a new CEO. So it's the same thing all the way down to the project level. So that brings us finally to the operating system. The operating system is basically your team's playbook. Because guess what? It helps you optimize delegation at every level. It helps people understand how to make optimal decisions within a framework. It's essentially the operating instructions that everyone needs, and it builds a high-performance environment. So you establish the guardrails, you establish the checkpoints, and you establish the incentives. Real quick, before I move on to the North Star, does anyone recognize this graphic? If you were born in the 80s playing video games. Oh, wow, it's like several people. Call it out. I'm going to give you. Nope. Tecmo Bowl. See? Tecmo Bowl. Sorry if you didn't get the joke. Super nerdy 80s reference there. Trying to keep you fresh. All right. So by now you know what I meant when I said that the North Star operating system was literally born out of the ashes at Classy. It was built in our most challenging time as a company, but it was also a time of insane clarity. We sort of knew what mattered most. And so we built this thing because of that. And I'm going to walk you through it now. Just a reminder that the link, which I think I have, there we go. This is the link I showed in the beginning. There's 3 pillars or components or frameworks of the North Star OS: clarity, rhythm, and mindset. Clarity is all about aligning your team, as you'd expect. Rhythm is all about the cadence of your operations, and really you have these checkpoints along the way to drive accountability, especially peer-to-peer accountability. That's the strongest form of accountability. You need crazy amounts of peer-to-peer accountability. That's how you drive high performance. And then mindset, which is to create the right attitude at your company. So that, not that everyone's thinking exactly the same, but things like resilience. So these are some of the details there. Today, we're basically going to talk about clarity. So I'm going to focus on clarity, and then I encourage you guys to follow me on whatever, join my newsletter, and I will start to release the other two pillars to you guys over time as well. I teach all of this at Highland. I'm starting to, like Kevin said, I don't like to compare to other systems, and that was never really the goal, was to launch something like EOS or something, but that's where I'm at. It's sort of like, I'd say 80, 90% complete on the pillars as I build it out. But the clarity piece is completely done, and it's helping, I don't know, like probably hundreds of founders right now, which is pretty cool. So I like this graphic. Most people keep their team in the dark because they hold back information. They don't give them all the context that's needed to do their role. And each individual team member is essentially operating with a handicap all day long. And the leader doesn't recognize that. And it's not that necessarily they're trying to be nefarious or say, oh, I'm not transparent. They just assume that they have all the same information that they do. But they're in a privileged position. They're at the top. They have by far the most information than any person at the team. So the farther you go down on the chain, the less the person knows. So you really have to turn the light bulb on for your team. And that's what the clarity piece is all about. It's providing the greatest amount of context so someone can take that context and make great decisions without you next to them. And that goes back to the delegation piece. So there's 3 critical questions for clarity. I call it the PDP, purpose, direction, and progress. Why are we here? Where are we going? How are we doing? What's actually fascinating is that most CEOs and founders that I talk about can't even answer these 3 questions with clarity and succinctly for their own company. So think about that for a second. CEOs of companies that are like running up, largely successful companies, but they can't even answer these 3 questions with perfect clarity, with absolute clarity. And that kind of blew my mind when I started doing Highland. So the first thing is we start here, and there's a whole framework behind it, but it's about getting crystal clear on the answers to these 3 questions. Because if the leader doesn't understand or can't answer them succinctly at least, maybe they have it in their head. I'm not saying you don't know it, but knowing it in your head is not good enough. That's not turning the light bulb on for your team. Turning the light bulb on for your team is be able to communicate it to someone effectively. That's turning the light bulb onto your team. So this actually takes practice to get right. It seems so simple, but it takes practice. So if you can't get this right, imagine like the 10th person down on the org chart. I'm just going to pick on, I don't know, Jael. If Jael had a 100-person team and I picked 2 people at her company that were in different departments, how would they answer these questions? The variance would be massive. And I actually implore you guys to do this with your own leadership team. Start at the top. Do this exercise anonymously. Don't just do it. Everyone huddles up and they answer it for themselves. And then do a group exercise and compare everyone's answers. You'll be shocked. It's actually just kind of fun. It's not no one gets mad at this. This is like pretty friendly exercise. But the answers to that then give you some sort of starting point to say, well, what are the unified answer to this question? And the middle part are the tools that you use to answer it throughout your organization. So again, you might know it in your head, but if you're not able to articulate it, not only just verbally, kind of ad hoc, but actually formally through the organization, then people are just guessing. It's not good enough. So the answer, we use the mission and values to answer why are we here. We use vision, and all these should be very common to you. This isn't like I invented these things. Vision answers the question, where are we going? And then a goal system that I call the why goes answers how are we doing? And that's why, the goals, and the outcome. Whoa, this is the money slide. So this is actually the framework, this is the clarity framework all put together. So you can see, and this is in the template, so you can fill this out for your own company. But this puts everything in one slide. So literally, if I handed this slide to someone that doesn't even work at Classy, they would know what we do. Honestly, if I handed it to someone that didn't work there, and they had this, and someone that worked there did not have this, Who would answer some of those questions better, you think? The person that works at Classy or doesn't work at Classy? I think it'd be a toss-up, to be honest, and maybe even the person that had this. So this tool is incredibly important for new employees, for onboarding, for the annual company kickoff, for QBRs, for all-hands meetings, for board meetings, for fundraising, for pretty much everything. You use this for everything. It is your communication tool. So at the top, you have your 100-year mission. Right below that, you have mission, what I call mission focus, which is basically within the 100 years, what are we doing now? Like what are we now? And that's an important piece. Then we have our values, and there's definition behind those. Then you have a strategic vision. So you have the 3-year vision, the 5-year, the 10-year, and the 20. Each one builds upon the other one. So we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do this. And then you have the why goes. And I'll get into the detail in a sec here, but they're all right there. The why, you have the goal, and then the measurable outcomes. These are just some examples. This is my local company. We just did it for fun. I upgraded the template since this was there. So you can just see, these are some of the founders in Highland, their companies. That's a pretty one. And then this is it filled out. It's in the template too, but this is for my community and coaching program, Highland. So we actually eat our own dog food, and we filled this out for ourselves and made it available to all the members so they can see. The members are basically our staff, if you will. It's a very small team. And then we get the 75 CEOs. So we went through this with them at the kickoff and said, this is what we're doing. So how much time we got left? 10 minutes? All right. Should I keep going? Or do you guys have questions?
Clock's right there. Yep.
I'll keep going.
Plenty of time, and then let's do Q&A later.
Do you want to, go ahead. If someone has a question. No? Okay. I'll keep rolling, and then we can go into it.
Let's do Q&A in about 2-3 minutes.
Sure. Yeah. All right. So this is the 100-year mission. I took 30 of my favorite mission statements. All I did was color the 2 that were relevant to me, which was Classy and GoFundMe. So a mission statement is something that answers the question, why do we exist? It's 10 words or less. It's timeless. I call it T-shirt worthy. You don't want something that you wouldn't be proud to wear on your T-shirt. If it's too corporate-y and has about, is that cool? No, it's not cool. No one's going to remember that. It needs to be T-shirt worthy. Aligns with the rest of the PDP. You can't have a mission statement that doesn't align with your direction and progress. That makes no sense. Alludes to benefit plus delivery. What benefit are you giving the world, and how are you delivering it? And you're proud of it. Are you proud of your mission? When you go to a bar, or you go to your NA bar, or wherever people are doing these days, and you sit if you sit at the stool and the person next to you, do you want to talk about your mission to that person, or do you hold it back? That's what I mean about, that's the bar test. That's what I mean about proud. Like you're literally coming off you're like excited to talk about it. That's what I mean. Not just something that you're like, yeah, that's what we do. And it's like 3 sentences, it makes no sense, and you'll never remember it anyways. And your team's proud of it. So this is the mission focus of Classy and GoFundMe, just to give you an example. So you have the 100-year mission of Classy to mobilize and empower the world for good. The mission focus, though, is world-class fundraising platform for nonprofits and its supporters. So along the 100-year journey, where are we at right now? That's what we're doing. Will we always be a fundraising platform for nonprofits? I don't know. Maybe. There's lots of ways to accomplish that mission. But that's what I'm talking about with mission focus. Same with GoFundMe. GoFundMe is to help people help others. Very broad. It's great. It's a great mission. Right now, it's the world's leading crowdfunding platform for individual causes. What happens in the age of AI? Will GoFundMe look like it does today? I have no clue. But that's the point. The mission is timeless. The mission focus is where you're at now. Here's the mission focus timeline. Again, answers where we're at now. Similar stuff, not T-shirt worthy. This is a cut and dry statement. This is exactly who you are. No fluff, no marketing, nothing. This is exactly what you are today. Crystal clear to everyone, more the what, not the why and the how. All right, on to values. So I'm sure everyone has values, especially in this crowd. You might impact peeps. We all have values. Let me tell you like a 30-second anecdote story. 5-7 years into Classy, we had this value called stand for something, top left. And we noticed that some of our employees were interpreting that value very differently than what the founders actually thought it meant. And they were kind of taking it and running with it and actually holding it against us in certain ways. And I won't get into the details on that one. But it brought up something where it was like, how could that be? That's crazy. I didn't even think about that. Like someone that's new that wasn't around, like in the beginning, you just learn through osmosis. Literally, you're in a room like this and you just all kind of know. You know how to act. But when you're the 250th person, do you know what stand for something actually means? Do you know what we thought it meant, why we put it up there? So the second part is so critical. It sounds so simple, but defining every value and starting with an action statement. The value itself in the system is an action statement, not like integrity or teamwork or something like that. Those are very corporate-y. It's something that's actionable. And so the definition is also actionable. It starts with we. We do X, we do Y, and it defines what the value is. I won't go through that. So our vision. So the vision is meant to explain, in X years, we will do Y. And the way this is set up, it has some strategy in it. Normally, you've probably heard of a vision statement, but a vision statement is too similar to a mission statement and often gets confused. This takes basically the vision statement concepts and it puts it into a sequence so that you can say, okay, in 3 years, we're going to do this, in 5 years, we're going to do that, in 10 years, we're going to do that, and in 20 years, we're going to do that. And it all just sort of makes sense. So if someone looks at this, they're like, oh, I get it. It has a sequence to it. And the percentages on the right are the resourcing, approximate. So the way you read this is, in 3 years, we're going to build the world's best fundraising products for nonprofits, and we're going to spend about 80% of our resources on it. And so that tells someone on the team, wait a sec, oh, interesting. Like, I get it. Like, we can talk and do, we can work on these other things, but 80% of our effort's here. Have you ever been with someone like all they want to talk about is like 10 to 20 years from now, and you're like, dude, we have like burning, like the house is on fire. Why are you talking about 20 years from now? And then the opposite is true too, where you just want to have a conversation about where we're headed, and the person keeps bringing up the fires that are right in front of you. And you're like, dude, get your head out of the details. Pick your head up. Let's talk about tomorrow. This solves that. It gives people permission to talk about the future, but it calibrates the amount of time and effort and money that you spend on the certain things. And it's simple but unbelievably powerful when it's used internally. And last but not least is the why goes. So before the North Star OS, we were basically running on a souped-up version of the OKRs. We had pretty much broken the thing. Who uses the OKRs here? Anyone? Okay, a couple people. Maybe other people use EOS Rocks in that system. So this isn't that dissimilar from those things. Yeah, I'd say it's probably more like EOS than it is OKRs, because we found a lot of issues with the OKR process. But the OKRs end up being, because they're less prescriptive, they end up turning into this sort of complex mess. And it's very difficult to find focus within the OKR process. Whereas the EOS is, in my opinion, overly prescriptive. And what we try to do is find a middle ground here. The focus is, or the way this is constrained is 3 or less goals, that's it. You can't have more than 3 goals. It doesn't mean it's everything that you do throughout the year, but it forces constraint. So it says, what are your top 3 priorities, period. And then it has measurable outcomes, so you can always understand exactly, with 100% certainty, if you accomplish the goal or not. And it has this why statement. So when we used to run the OKRs, people used to come, they didn't even ask me, they just said, why are we doing this? Like, that's what they'd be thinking in their head. And they would actually hold resentment, like, why did these assholes in their ivory tower decide that this is a priority? You know, they didn't understand the why behind the goal. So this simple exercise, and this cascades down all the way to the individual level. So it goes company, team, individual. Everyone has a why statement, which basically just shows you the alignment. Once you see the why statements, the why is this a priority? Which means company has to tell you why it's a priority. Team has to tell you why they picked that, which basically aligns to the company, and so on and so forth. And so you get this amazing mind meld of alignment through the why statement, and it brings in the strategy into the system. Again, unbelievably simple, but powerful. This is Classy's, this is illustrative. I changed some numbers, but this is actually a WIGO from Classy's North Star. So you can see it's about recurring giving, the goal, drive recurring giving higher for all customers, and then actual outcomes. Typically, the goal doesn't have numbers in it. It's more directional. The outcomes are the numbers piece. People kind of mess that up with OKRs and other systems too. So we purposely put the measure in the outcomes, and that's how you measure the success of the goal. So I won't go through this. We'll go to the questions. But you can see in the thing, we have the why checklist, we have the goal checklist, and then we have the outcome checklist. And that, my friends, is the first framework of 3 of the North Star OS. I know I went through that pretty fast, but the template should definitely allow you guys to digest it, build on it if you want. There's no charge. I'm currently trying to figure out how to protect it under the Creative Commons license, but I want it to be viewed more like an open source platform so that people can literally take the templates and build on it and then contribute back to the community, what's worked and what hasn't for them, so that the overall system gets better. That's my basic mentality with this. So you guys are, Highland's been doing this for probably a year to 2 years, but it's one of the first groups that I've shared the whole thing with. So hopefully you guys find value in it. Thank you very much.
Amazing, Scott. Thank you so much. Now we're going to open up for Q&A here. Yes, Q&A is Zach.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. And I think I speak for everybody for saying thanks for not just what you're doing, but the way that you're doing it and making this all open to us is just awesome and super helpful. I'm curious to hear how does innovation fit into all of this, right? So if you think about like the Google 70-20-10 model, right? Like 10% of the resources should be going to something pretty like moonshotty or radical. How does that fit with North Star?
So I would say that there's two parts to that answer. So the idea that your annual goals are stretch goals, we did that for a while, and it broke down in a number of ways. And I won't get into all the nitty-gritty details. But the other thing that OKR, and this is tied to it, the other thing that the OKR process tells you is that OKRs shouldn't be tied to individual compensation for this very reason, because they're supposed to be more stretch goals. So the grading system was too complex there, and also people didn't understand, wait, you're telling me that these are my priorities, these OKRs, yet I'm compensated on something completely different? Like, that never made sense to me. And so this aligns, actually, the part we didn't even get, when the incentive part, it aligns compensation, the bonus plan, everything to the why goes. So the question back to what you're saying is like, can people just sandbag, their goals? Does it lower the bar on quality? And the answer is no, for 2 reasons. One is at every level, the team and the individual, so the leader of the team and the individual, they actually come up with their own goals first. And then there's a negotiation with their manager. So there's a I call it the handshake, which basically they're saying, hey, here's how I think I can best help the company this year. Here's how I can move the needle. And they come up with their own why goes. And then they sit down with the manager, and the manager says, yeah, let's calibrate this a little bit. This is either too easy or too hard or whatever. And then they handshake, and then it's done. And so it starts with the employee. It's not top down. It starts with the employee. That's the number one thing. And then the visioning process and the WIGO process at the company level, I think, and I can't prove this, but I think it's more participatory than the average system. So, and we don't have time to go through all that, happy to connect, but it involves more of the company. So that's also less top down, which means that when you're talking about the vision and all of that, that's where a lot of the innovation comes in, which then cascades to the WIGO. So it's like almost like the innovation's built in because of the participatory nature of the vision, versus it having to come from each individual saying, oh, this is like my stretch goal for the year, and then they hit 60%, and they're all bummed out, and then they're not tied to their compensation, and then blah, 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 all those issues.
Zach, thank you. Other questions here today? Questions for Scott? Yeah, Richard.
Yeah, I just had a question about when your company was on the verge of collapse, whether you had considered a name change. And just because when you're in repositioning mode, thinking about how can, like, say, our name or our communications better embody our positioning. Because I think of looking at the goals of, say, GoFundMe versus your company. I just think of the name brand with GoFundMe and how it aligns with that mission. Seems to be a lot easier for my brain to understand the mission behind the company. For example, where Classy, there might be a disconnect in terms of your mission and your name brand.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just, the answer is no, we didn't consider a name change, not because of the adversity. We considered a name change earlier to like impact this or impact that, frankly. And that we even hired a consultant and went through that whole process. And I gotta be honest with you that I'm so glad that we didn't. And the reason is like, if I just said there's a company called Amazon, would you know what that is? Like, that doesn't really speak. What matters most to me is that we redefine the word classy for our employees and the nonprofits. We basically use it to our advantage, the weirdness of it, the uniqueness of it, to our advantage. So it became, at least in the nonprofit space, as a really, as like a sort of a symbol of a word within that space, especially because of the Classy Awards. So did it take extra work to kind of get there? Yes, absolutely. But we did do like studies literally to say, is this shooting us in the foot? Like it's tied to Anchorman, the movie of all things. You know what I mean? I don't know if you've seen that. But he says, you stay classy San Diego, and that was the name of the first pub crawl. And actually that brings up a good point. The other piece is that it's uniquely tied to the founding story. So if I came up here and said, we were called Classy, and I told you this pub crawl story, and then, but we changed our name to Impact Fundraising, you'd be like, wah, wah, wah. Like, that's so boring and not to say you're suggesting that, but I'm just saying in general, we did go through that. But I think it was a pro and a con, but because we weren't a consumer platform, I think it worked for us.
It's a good answer because you can then redefine that.
And we did. We had Classy shirts, the Classy Awards, so it started to mean something.
Richard, thank you. Other questions?
So on an EOS process, or what you use when you're working with an individual team member that's leading some function, and they want to bring their own personality, and let's say you say the person come up with 3 critical success factors and define your rocks for the quarter, how do you incorporate your vision or the company's vision into their silo? What kind of freedom, what's that process look like?
So basically, what's the connection between the functional leader and the company level, more or less? Like,
Well, you're saying to a functional leader, here, we want you to come up with your 3, right?
Right. Oh, yeah, okay.
Goals. And within those goals, you have to have actionable items. And you want to kind of stay out of the process because you want them to drive that, but they have a certain role they have to fulfill.
Absolutely.
What's that process for you as their, quote, CEO of the company? How do you incorporate with them in them coming up with that? And if it's something you don't agree with or you don't feel like it's quite right, how do you help them hone that?
Gotcha.
Goals?
So you would have the company drafted already, and the leaders, before they even touch their team, would be involved in that process. You would bring the company level draft, and then there's a series of meetings and stuff where you work through that and finalize that with those functional leaders so they're bought in. Because what you don't want to happen is just to say, this is the company priorities, here you go. And you chuck it at them, and then they're like, well, I don't even know what So there's again, that is highly participatory on the front end. Second is the company priorities, or the company WIGOs rather, are the top 3 priorities for the year. They're not everything the company will be doing that year, but it's the top 3 priorities as blessed by the CEO, the board of directors, and also the leadership team. So let's just say like the head of marketing, the CMO or something, needed to do the marketing WIGOs. He or she would look at the company level WIGOs and specifically the outcomes and say, okay, where can my team move the needle against one or more of these outcomes? And that's that's the alignment that we'd be looking for. So when I would meet with her, we would sit down and she would present them to me, and I would ask that question, like, how do you see your top 3 priorities for the marketing team? Because they can only do 3 too there. Explain to me how that moves the needle for the company. Because theoretically, in a utopian setting, the success of every functional leader, if they hit all their WIGOs, would equal the success of the company's priorities. Sometimes there's a small gap there, but that's what you're going for. And the same of the marketing individuals. If all the marketing individuals are successful, well, then the marketing team should be successful. That's the tight alignment that basically you're looking for. So there's that back and forth. You give them feedback, they go back to the drawing board, et cetera. And that's how you basically negotiate that. Now, last thing I'll say, there's a separate category called health metrics or KPIs, right, for a marketing team. And a marketing team might have leads, obviously. They're driving leads for the company. But leads, like total leads, might not actually show up in the WIGOs. Why wouldn't it? Because maybe the priority is enterprise leads, or it's some specific strategic thing there that's saying, like, that's our priority for the year. It doesn't mean they're off the hook for the total lead number. They still have, say, 5 health metrics that are always on, that they're always responsible for. But the WIGOs pick the most important ones to say, we have to get this right this year. We have to get this right. And so that's kind of the relationship between the 3. Does that make sense?
Scott, amazing. Thank you so much. Round of applause for Scot Chisholm.
Yep. Thank you.
Boom. Stay classy.